The morning began like any other, mundane, predictable, steeped in routine. I woke to the sound of my alarm buzzing at 5:30 a.m., its grating persistence pulling me from the comfort of sleep. I turned it off with a groggy swipe, careful not to disturb Maria, who was still curled up beside me. Her steady breathing was a small comfort in an otherwise relentless life. As usual, I slid out of bed quietly, making my way to the bathroom. The face staring back at me in the mirror was worn, tired. Dark circles underscored my eyes, and my stubble was more salt than pepper these days. 2 jobs will do that to a man. But I didn't mind. Every paycheck I earned was for Maria and Ava, our 7-year-old daughter. By 6:15, I was dressed and in the kitchen, nursing a cup of black coffee. Ava's dance recital was coming up, and I'd been saving every spare dollar to make sure she could shine. It was a quiet satisfaction to know my hard work was building something beautiful. Maria joined me around 6:45, still wrapped in the oversized robe she loved. Her hair was mussed from sleep, and she gave me a half-hearted smile before moving toward the coffee pot. "Morning," I said, as I always did. "Morning," she replied, her voice distant. It was small, but I noticed. The way she didn't meet my eyes, the way her smile didn't quite reach the corners of her mouth. I wanted to brush it off, but the seed of unease had been planted. Maria had been different lately. It was subtle, barely perceptible, really, but enough for someone who knew her as intimately as I did to notice. She laughed less, spent more time on her phone. The kisses she gave me were perfunctory, like they were more habit than affection, but I'd chalked it up to stress. We were both working hard to make ends meet, and it wasn't unusual for the strain to creep into our relationship. At least, that's what I told myself. That day, like most days, I left the house by 7 a.m., heading to my first job at the warehouse. The hours passed in a blur of loading docks and heavy machinery. By the time I clocked out, I had just enough time to grab a quick sandwich before heading to my evening job as a security guard. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. When I got home that night, Maria was sitting on the couch with her laptop open, a glass of wine on the coffee table. Ava had already gone to bed. Normally, Maria would look up and greet me with a warm smile, maybe even a teasing remark about how late I was. But tonight, she didn't seem to notice I was there. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys onto the counter. "Hey," she replied without looking up. I stood there for a moment, watching her. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with purpose, her brows furrowed in concentration. The glow of the screen cast shadows on her face, highlighting a tension I couldn't quite place. "What's got you so focused?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just work stuff," she said, her voice clipped. The unease I'd felt that morning returned, stronger this time. Maria's part-time job at the boutique wasn't exactly demanding, and she rarely brought work home. "You sure?" I pressed. Finally, she looked up, her expression unreadable. "Yes, I'm sure," she said. "Why are you being weird about this?" I blinked, taken aback by her defensiveness. "I'm not being weird. I'm just asking." "Well, don't," she said, closing her laptop with more force than necessary. She stood and picked up her wine glass, heading toward the kitchen without another word. I stared after her, confusion swirling in my chest. This wasn't like her. The following days brought more of the same. Maria was distant, distracted. She left for her shifts at the boutique with an unusual eagerness, and when she came home, she was always glued to her phone. I noticed her texting more often, her face lighting up with small, secretive smiles. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, what reason did Maria have to hide anything from me? We'd been married for 10 years, had built a life together. She loved me. I knew she did. But the unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of my mind like a relentless tide eroding the shore. It wasn't until the following Thursday that things took a sharper turn. That evening, I came home from my security job to find the house dark. Normally, Maria would leave a light on for me, but tonight the living room and kitchen were both shrouded in shadow. "Maria?" I called out, flipping on the lights. No answer. I checked Ava's room first, finding her fast asleep, her small form tangled in the covers. Relief washed over me. At least she was safe. But where was Maria? I pulled out my phone and called her. The line rang twice before going to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep. "Just wondering where you are. Call me back." I hung up and tried to shake the unease settling in my stomach. Maybe she had run out to grab something and forgot to text me. It wouldn't be the first time. I decided to wait, settling onto the couch with the TV on low. An hour passed. Then two. By midnight, I couldn't sit still any longer. I called her again. This time, the call went straight to voicemail. Something was wrong. Around 12:30 a.m., the front door finally creaked open. Maria stepped inside, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. She froze when she saw me sitting on the couch. "Oh," she said, her voice a little too bright. "You're still up? Where were you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. I went out with some coworkers," she said, brushing past me toward the kitchen. "At midnight?" "It went later than I expected," she said, her tone defensive. She poured herself a glass of water, her back to me. "Why didn't you answer your phone?" "I didn't hear it," she said, turning to face me. Her expression was guarded. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that I was just overreacting. But the gnawing unease had grown into full-blown suspicion, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I couldn't. I nodded, forcing myself to drop the subject. "Okay," I said. "Glad you're home safe." She seemed relieved that I wasn't pushing the issue further. But as I watched her disappear into our bedroom, one thought looped endlessly in my mind. Something wasn't right. I didn't sleep that night. As Maria lay beside me, her breathing soft and even, my mind raced with questions. Where had she really been? Why had she lied? And who, if anyone, had she been with? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't ignore this anymore. Whatever was happening, I needed to find out the truth. The ordinary had cracked open, revealing something dark and unrecognizable beneath. In the days following Maria's late-night return, I found myself hyper-aware of everything about her. Her movements, her words, the way she carried herself. Each detail, no matter how small, seemed to beg for closer inspection. I hated it. I hated the suspicious man I was becoming. I told myself it was all in my head. Maria had always been independent, and her job at the boutique gave her a chance to be herself outside the constraints of home life. Maybe that was all this was. But once the seed of doubt is planted, it has a way of growing, twisting every thought until it's impossible to ignore. It started with little things. One evening, I noticed Maria's favorite necklace, a delicate gold chain with a small emerald pendant, missing from her jewelry box. It wasn't the kind of thing she usually wore to work, but I figured she might have taken it with her for some reason. "You haven't worn your necklace in a while," I said casually over dinner. She glanced up from her plate, her brow furrowing for a fraction of a second before smoothing. "Oh, I took it to get cleaned," she said. "It was looking a little dull." I nodded, letting the explanation slide, but something about the way she avoided my gaze made my stomach churn. Then there were her shoes. Maria had always been practical with her footwear, sneakers for errands, flats for work. But one morning, as I was heading out the door, I noticed a pair of red heels tucked away in the corner of our closet. They were new. And not just new, pristine. "Those are nice," I said, gesturing toward them. She hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Thanks. I got them on sale. I thought they'd be fun for date nights or something." "Date nights?" I asked, arching an eyebrow. "We haven't had one of those in months." Her smile faltered, and she shrugged. "Well, maybe we should change that." It was a perfectly reasonable response, yet it left me uneasy. The conversations were stranger still. Maria had always been chatty, sharing the minutiae of her day with me over dinner or during our rare quiet moments together. But now, she spoke in half sentences and vague generalities. "How was work?" I asked one night. "Fine," she said, her eyes flickering toward her phone. "Nothing exciting." I glanced at her phone, which was face down on the table. It seemed to be face down more often these days. "What about that new girl you mentioned? Ashley, was it?" "Oh, she's fine," Maria said, her tone dismissive. "She's catching on." Fine. Everything was always fine. I told myself I was overthinking it. Work was stressful, and Maria was probably just tired. She had started bringing her phone with her everywhere, even to the bathroom, but maybe that was just habit. People are glued to their phones these days, right? But then there was the laundry. One Sunday morning, I was sorting through the pile of clothes Maria had left on our bedroom floor. Most of it was her usual fare: jeans, blouses, a sweater. But as I reached the bottom of the pile, my hand brushed against something unfamiliar. It was a shirt, a men's shirt. I held it up, staring at it as though it might explain itself. It was crisp and neatly folded, the kind of thing a businessman might wear, not the kind of thing I owned. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Maybe she'd borrowed it from a coworker after spilling coffee on herself. Or maybe it was a mistake at the dry cleaners. There had to be an innocent reason for it to be here. When Maria walked into the room a moment later, I held up the shirt. "This isn't mine," I said. Her eyes widened briefly before she plastered on a smile. "Oh, that's from work," she said. "One of the other girls brought it for a display, and I accidentally brought it home with me. I was going to return it tomorrow." "A display?" I echoed. "Yeah," she said quickly. "You know, for the men's section. They're trying to do more cross-marketing, or whatever." I nodded slowly, but her explanation felt rehearsed. The tipping point came on a Tuesday evening. I had left work early to pick Ava up from dance class, something I rarely got to do. We stopped for ice cream on the way home, and she chattered happily about her new routine. When we got back to the house, I noticed a strange car parked in the driveway. It was sleek and black, the kind of car that stood out in our modest neighborhood. "Whose car is that?" Ava asked, her small hand slipping into mine. "I don't know," I said, my voice tight. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I called out for Maria, but there was no response. I led Ava to her room, telling her to work on her homework while I figured out what was going on. As I approached our bedroom, I heard the low hum of voices. One of them was Maria's. I hesitated outside the door, my heart pounding. Pushing the door open, I found Maria sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, her expression froze. "Yeah, I'll call you back," she said quickly, ending the call. "Who was that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "No one," she said, standing. "Just a work thing." "Maria, whose car is in the driveway?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Before she could respond, the front door creaked open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, and then a man's voice called out, "Maria?" My chest tightened as the man appeared in the doorway. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and painfully familiar. It was the man I'd seen her with outside the boutique. "Ethan," Maria said, her voice trembling. He looked at me, then at her, then back at me. I think I should go," he muttered, backing out of the room. I turned to Maria, my hands shaking. "Who is he?" She didn't answer. "Who is he, Maria?" Her silence was louder than any confession could have been. That night, after Ethan had slunk out of the house and Maria had locked herself in the bathroom, I sat alone in the living room. Ava was asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in our home. I wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against the betrayal. But all I could do was sit there, staring at the darkened television screen, my mind racing with questions I didn't want answered. The evidence was undeniable now. The distance, the lies, the shirt, the car. It all pointed to one thing. Maria wasn't just slipping away from me. She was running, and I had no idea if she would ever stop. The morning after Ethan's unwelcome visit, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My mind was raw, replaying every detail of what I'd seen and heard. Maria had avoided me after our confrontation, retreating to the guest room with a blanket and her phone. By the time I dragged myself out of bed, she was already gone. On the kitchen counter, a hastily scribbled note awaited me. "Went to work early. Let's talk later." I stared at the note, the words twisting in my chest. Anger bubbled just beneath the surface, tangled with confusion and, despite everything, hope. Was it possible this wasn't what it seemed? Maybe Ethan really was just a coworker, someone who had crossed a line Maria didn't know how to set. Maybe. But then I remembered the way her face had frozen when I said his name, the tremble in her voice. The way she looked at him, not with fear, but with something unspoken, something I didn't want to name. I crumpled the note in my hand, the weight of my own denial pressing against my ribs. The truth was, I didn't want to know, because if I confirmed my worst fears, there would be no coming back. That day, I moved through work in a haze, barely aware of what I was doing. My coworkers cast concerned glances my way, but no one asked questions. I must have looked like a ghost. By the time my shift ended, the thought of going home to an empty house filled me with dread. Instead, I drove aimlessly, the streets blurring into one another as I wrestled with my thoughts. I needed clarity, someone to talk to, someone who wouldn't just tell me what I wanted to hear. I ended up at my brother Sam's house. Sam had always been the level-headed one, the kind of guy who could cut through the noise and get to the heart of a problem. I needed that. When he opened the door, his face immediately darkened with concern. "Mark? What's going on? Can I come in?" I asked. "Of course." He stepped aside, gesturing toward the couch. "You look like hell." "I feel like it." For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the carpet. How could I even put this into words? Saying it out loud would make it real. "It's Maria," I said finally. Sam leaned forward, his brow furrowing. "What about her?" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. When they came, they felt heavy, like stones dragging me down. "I think she's cheating on me." The room seemed to still around us. Sam didn't speak right away. He just watched me with that steady, unflinching gaze of his. "Why do you think that?" he asked gently. So I told him everything. The texts, the missing necklace, the red heels, the strange shirt, Ethan's visit. By the time I was done, I felt hollow, like I'd poured out every ounce of pain I'd been carrying. Sam exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. "That's a lot," he said. "But are you sure? I mean, has she admitted anything?" "No," I said quickly. "She keeps dodging my questions, giving me half-truths." "Maybe she's telling the truth," he said cautiously. "Or maybe she's not. Either way, you need to know for sure before you do anything drastic." "How?" My voice cracked with frustration. "How am I supposed to find out without driving myself insane?" "You've got two choices," he said. "Confront her directly and demand the truth, or wait and gather more evidence. But either way, you can't ignore it." I nodded, though the idea of another confrontation filled me with dread. "Look," Sam said, his voice softening. "Whatever happens, you'll get through it. But you need to be honest with yourself about what you want. If she is cheating, can you forgive her?" I didn't have an answer. That evening, I went home, my mind a storm of questions. I didn't want to fight or accuse, I just wanted clarity. But as soon as I stepped inside, I froze. Maria was sitting at the dining table, tears streaming down her face. In front of her lay a pile of old photographs, some of us, some of Ava, and some from her childhood. She looked up, startled, when she saw me. "Mark," she whispered, her voice raw. I approached cautiously. "What's going on?" She wiped at her cheeks, her hands trembling. "I've been thinking about us. About everything." I sat down across from her, my heart pounding. "And?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "I know I've been distant," she said. "I know you've noticed." "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "I have." Tears welled up in her eyes again, spilling over. "I love you, Mark." "I do." But I felt lost, like I don't know who I am anymore. And I didn't know how to tell you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been bracing for a confession, for something that would confirm my worst fears. But this was something else entirely. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I didn't want to burden you," she said. "You already do so much for us." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But Ethan's face flashed in my mind, and the doubt came roaring back. "Maria," I said carefully. "Who is Ethan?" Her face paled, and for a moment, I thought she might deny it. But then she looked away, her shoulders slumping. "He's a friend," she said. "A friend who shows up at our house uninvited?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly. "He's been helping me sort through some things." Personal things. I stared at her, my mind racing. Was she telling the truth? Or was this just another carefully crafted lie? I want to believe you, I said finally, but I don't know if I can. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. As I sat there, watching her cry, I felt an overwhelming wave of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, guilt, and, somewhere deep down, hope. Maybe we could fix this. Maybe there was still a way forward. But as much as I wanted to believe her, the seed of doubt had grown too deep, and I wasn't sure it would ever go away. Maria's tears haunted me long after our conversation at the dining table. Her words had been raw, her emotions painfully real. For a moment, I almost believed her, believed that her distance, the late nights, and even Ethan's presence could be explained by something as simple as feeling lost. But doubt gnawed at me like a parasite. Her explanations didn't match the facts. And Ethan wasn't someone I could ignore. That night, as Maria slept in the guest room again, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sam's words echoed in my mind. You can confront her directly, or you can wait and gather more evidence. I decided on the latter. The next morning, after dropping Ava off at school, I drove to Maria's workplace. The boutique was small but stylish, nestled between a cafe and a yoga studio. I parked a few spaces away, the steering wheel cool beneath my trembling hands. At exactly 9 a.m., Maria's car pulled into the lot. She stepped out, polished as ever. Black skirt, neat blouse, her hair swept up into a bun. She didn't look like someone wrestling with existential turmoil. If anything, she looked like she had it all together, the perfect picture of professionalism. I hated myself for sitting there, spying on her. But I hated her secrets even more. 15 minutes later, another car pulled into the lot. My stomach churned as the sleek black sedan came into view. It was Ethan. He stepped out, exuding confidence. His suit was immaculate, his movements fluid. He adjusted his cuffs, glanced briefly at his phone, then strode into the boutique without hesitation. He didn't pause, didn't look around. He acted like he belonged, like this was routine. I clenched the steering wheel, the leather creaking beneath my grip. Ethan wasn't just a coworker. He wasn't some casual acquaintance dropping by. This wasn't normal. I waited for what felt like an eternity before Ethan reappeared. He stepped out of the boutique smiling, his phone in hand as he typed a message. He didn't look back before getting into his car and driving off. That evening, as we sat down to dinner, I confronted Maria. Ethan came to see you at work today, I said, keeping my tone steady. Maria froze, her fork suspended in midair. Her reaction was subtle, but I caught it. What? I saw him, I said. I was parked outside. He walked in, stayed for a while. She sighed, setting her fork down. Mark, this is ridiculous. Ethan stopped by to pick up a jacket he left here last week. That's it. A jacket? I repeated, incredulous. At 9 in the morning? Couldn't he have called, or picked it up later? Maybe he wanted to see me, she snapped, her eyes flashing with frustration. He's a friend, Mark. Is that so hard to believe? The venom in her voice stung, but I pushed through. He's not just a friend, Maria, I said, my voice rising. You're hiding something. She shoved her chair back, the scrape of wood on tile echoing in the room. I'm not doing this, she said, storming out. I followed her to the guest room, where she was hastily gathering a pillow and blanket. Maria, just tell me the truth, I pleaded. If it's not what I think it is, prove it. Please. For a moment, her face softened. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, to bridge the growing chasm between us. I'm trying, Mark, she said quietly, but you have to trust me. Then she shut the door in my face. Her refusal to explain only deepened my resolve. If she wouldn't give me the truth, I'd find it myself. I unlocked her phone that night. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. There was nothing, no text from Ethan, no suspicious threads. Her social media was clean, almost too clean. It felt staged. Then I checked her email, and there it was. Subject, tonight. From Ethan. Maria, can't stop thinking about last time. I'll be waiting at the usual spot, 7:30 sharp. Don't keep me waiting too long. There was an address at the bottom. A motel on the outskirts of town. I arrived at the motel the next evening, my heart pounding. The lot was nearly empty, the flickering neon sign casting eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. I parked far from the entrance, the engine's hum fading into an oppressive silence. At 7:25, Ethan's sedan pulled in. He parked near the entrance and stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He adjusted his tie, glanced briefly around, then walked inside with a purpose that made my blood boil. He wasn't sneaking. He wasn't nervous. He acted like he had nothing to hide. 5 minutes later, Maria's car arrived. She parked farther away, as if trying to avoid being seen. Her movements were the opposite of Ethan's, hurried, almost frantic. She kept her head low, her hair falling over her face like a veil. Her shoulders were hunched, her steps quick. I wanted to believe her posture meant guilt, that she was hesitant because she regretted this. But the deliberate way she approached the entrance told me otherwise. For the next hour, I sat in my car, my mind racing. 1,000 explanations ran through my head, some innocent, most damning. Deep down, I already knew the truth. I just didn't want to see it. At 8:45, Ethan walked out alone. He was straightening his tie, a smug expression on his face. He didn't look back as he got into his car and drove off. Maria emerged a few minutes later. Her blouse was slightly untucked, her hair disheveled. She avoided looking around, her pace quick as she got into her car and drove off. I sat there for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The truth was undeniable now. When I got home, Maria was already in bed. I wanted to confront her, to demand an explanation. But what could she say that I hadn't already seen? Instead, I opened my laptop and searched for a divorce attorney. But before I could make any final decisions, one question lingered, burning like an open wound. Why? I didn't sleep the night after the motel. The images of Maria and Ethan burned in my mind, playing on an endless loop. Maria, head down, slipping out of that dingy building as though she could outrun her shame. Ethan, with his smug, confident stride. I had seen enough. By morning, I had already scheduled a meeting with a divorce attorney. But as I drove to the appointment, something gnawed at me. I needed closure. I couldn't move forward without hearing her side, no matter how much it hurt. That evening, after Ava was asleep, I cornered Maria in the living room. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking calm, like the events of the last few days hadn't happened. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. She glanced up, her expression wary. "Mark, if this is about—" "I followed you to the motel." Her face went pale, the blood draining from her cheeks. For a moment, she said nothing, her lips parted in silent disbelief. Then she exhaled sharply, setting her phone down. "So that's it," she said quietly. "Who is Ethan?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "And don't lie to me this time." Maria folded her hands in her lap, staring down at them as if searching for the right words. "He's someone I used to know," she said finally. "Used to?" I shot back. "Maria, you're meeting him at motels. What am I supposed to think?" Her head snapped up, anger flashing in her eyes. "You're supposed to think that maybe there's more to this than what you've decided in your head. Then tell me," I yelled. "Because right now, it looks like you're cheating on me." She flinched at the word, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm not cheating on you, Mark. Not in the way you think." "Then explain it," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Please." Maria wiped at her eyes, taking a shaky breath. "Ethan is an ex," she said. I stared at her, the weight of her words settling over me like a stone. "We dated in college," she continued. "It was serious, at least, I thought it was. But he cheated on me. More than once." She let out a bitter laugh. "I was stupid enough to forgive him, until the last time." I folded my arms, unsure where this was going. "And now?" "He showed up at the boutique a few months ago," she said, her voice trembling. I hadn't seen him in years. He said he wanted to apologize, to make amends for what he did to me. At first, I didn't want anything to do with him. But he kept coming around. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. And you just let him back into your life? Why? Because I thought I could handle it, she said, her voice rising. I thought it would help me let go of all the resentment I'd been carrying. But then things got complicated. Complicated how? I asked, my stomach twisting. Maria hesitated, her gaze dropping again. Ethan's been going through a rough divorce, she said. He's not in a good place. And I. You what? I pressed. I felt sorry for him, she admitted. I thought I could be a friend, someone to lean on, but I was wrong. He wants more. And I didn't know how to handle it. I stared at her, my heart pounding. Maria, are you in love with him? No, she said, her voice breaking. No, Mark. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Then why meet him at a motel? I demanded. Because I was trying to end it, she cried. He kept pushing, kept asking me to meet him in private. I thought if I told him in person that there was no chance, none, that he'd finally leave me alone. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with emotion. Did anything happen? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. No, she said firmly. Nothing. I swear to you, Mark. I told him it was over, and I left. For a long moment, I said nothing. Her explanation felt genuine, but it didn't erase the weeks of doubt, the lies, the distance. You should have told me, I said finally, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. You should have come to me instead of sneaking around with him. I know, she said, tears streaming down her face. I know I should have, but I didn't want to drag you into it. I didn't want you to think. To think what? That you were cheating on me? I snapped. She flinched but didn't argue. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? I said, my voice rising. The sleepless nights, the paranoia, wondering if I'm losing my wife to another man. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, I said, my voice breaking. You hurt me, Maria, and I don't know if I can forgive you for that. The next few days were a blur of tension and silence. Maria tried to give me space, but I could see the guilt weighing on her. Ava, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the storm brewing between us. I canceled my appointment with the divorce attorney, not because I was ready to forgive Maria, but because I wasn't ready to give up on our marriage. Sam called, asking if I'd made a decision. Not yet, I said. Take your time, he said, but don't let this eat away at you. I knew he was right, but the road ahead felt impossibly long. The final twist came 2 weeks later. Maria and I were sitting in the living room, cautiously rebuilding the fragile bridge between us. She had cut off all contact with Ethan and even left her job at the boutique to prove her commitment. That night, as we watched a movie together, Maria's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. What is it? I asked, dreading the answer. It's Ethan, she said quietly, showing me the message. I'm sorry for everything. I'm leaving town. I hope you find happiness. It was a clean break. No drama, no lingering ties. Maria looked at me, her eyes searching mine. This is it, she said. No more secrets. No more lies. I nodded, but a part of me wondered if things could ever truly go back to the way they were. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized the truth wasn't just about Maria and Ethan. It was about me, about the cracks in our marriage that I had ignored for too long. Maria's actions had shaken the foundation of our relationship, but they had also forced us to confront the distance that had grown between us. Whether we could rebuild from here was a question only time could answer. For now, I decided to try. Not for Maria, not for Ava, but for myself. Because sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that force us to grow. And as painful as it was, I wasn't ready to let go of what we had built. Not yet.